Welcome to all our listeners. Ubuntunomics is a weekly roundup and discussion of the most important economic and political developments from Africa. Hosted by myself, Sia from PESA. PESA is a political economy think tank that promotes regional integration in SADC and provides research on the political economy of development in Africa. With me is my co-host, Sbu Nyati from Isakombe Assets. Isakombe Assets provides individuals with renewable energy assets in order to develop communities. Right. Hello, Sbu. How are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you, Sia. How are things that side?
Very well, thank you. I can't complain. And I'll get started with the SA update for this week. SA enters adjusted alert level 4. President Cyril Ramaphosa moved South Africa to alert level 4 from Monday, 28 June 2021 to Sunday, 11 July 2021. Over the last 7 days, average daily infections in Gauteng have surpassed the first two waves, and national new daily cases peaked over 17,000. The Delta variant of the COVID-19, which alarmingly spread throughout India recently, has been detected in 5 of the 9 South African provinces and is rapidly displacing the Beta variant, which has been dominant in the country until now. As a result, the daily curfew has been extended to start at 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. Non-essential business establishments are required to close at 8 p.m. All gatherings have been prohibited and funerals are limited to a maximum of 50 people, and the sale of alcohol for both on and off-site consumption has been prohibited. Leisurely travel in and out of Gauteng has been prohibited, and restaurants are only permitted to sell food for takeaway or delivery. The closure of schools and other educational institutions for the winter break has been brought forward, and all schools are expected to close by Friday, 2nd July 2021.
Tell me, Sia, have you heard of any government proposals or interventions to assist an already battered business sector, both the formal and the informal sectors?
Not at all. They haven't put out any plans as yet. The only kind of assistance is what we saw at last year during the first round of the pandemic. But there's been no further interventions announced for this year.
Okay, today I heard BUSA, which is the Business Unity South Africa, making it known that government are receptive to their calls for introducing the UIF TERS grant for those workers in the hospitality, the event and management, and those related, those workers in that related in those industries. They will be bearing the brunt of this current alert level 4. Pleas have been made to also include workers who are over 60 years of age within the same, obviously, labor unions are also involved at NEDLEC. And so this is a plea that has been made to the government to assist everyone, as was done in the previous hard lockdown of 2020. So that's what I heard this yesterday.
Interesting. We'll have to keep an eye and see where things go with that in that regard.
Yeah. Also, something else that that was interesting is that the basic education minister, Angie Motshekga, was saying that 200,000 educators have been vaccinated so far. That is educators, both educators and staff who work at schools. So the initial target is to reach 582,000 personnel. who are eligible to receive the single-dose Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Yeah. It clearly shows, this entire thing clearly shows that an accelerated program to reach the envisaged 300,000 doses per day can be achieved if there is enough supplies.
Yeah, I'm going to say, I think at the moment we're currently at around 100,000, and that's the peak that we've reached in terms of vaccinations.
Yes. You might remember that 2 weeks ago we ran a story about President Ramaphosa having gone to the G7 meeting out in Cornwall. Good news is that the World Bank has announced a 600 million euro deal. That is about 10 billion South African rand. To support Aspen Pharmacare for increasing their manufacturing capacity in the country.
Wow.
The investment will, that investment will ensure that the company can produce up to 500,000 doses of the Johnson & Johnson, the single-dose Johnson & Johnson vaccine by 2022. Now, of this, 30 million doses will be set aside for South Africa for this current calendar year, because what they plan to do is to have 250 million doses coming out of South Africa for this. To be distributed throughout the continent. Yeah. Johnson & Johnson will produce the main ingredients, and Aspen, which is a South African company, will conduct the fill finish process where they package these doses. Yeah, it's good news. It's good news.
That's really, that's at least shows some progress in our fight against the pandemic. Yeah.
Exactly. And you know that I am quite fussy about who is footing the bill, who is financing who. So in this case, the World Bank's the IFC. The World Bank through the IFC will be the main funder, and they will refinance Aspen Pharmacare's existing debt, and they will strengthen the company's balance sheet. So it is a boon for the Koga-based company.
Sure.
Yep. And then also there are other 3 development agencies who will be also who are part of this package, who will be partners. From the US, you have the International Development Finance, which is called the DFC, which out of their core budget will fund this venture to the tune of 100 million euros. And then there is Germany's DEG and France's Proparco SA, which is another company. You'll remember that President Emmanuel Macron came to South Africa just before the G7 summit. So what we had been discussing is coming to fruition. I mean, all the geopolitics around the manufacturing of these doses and the financing. So it's very interesting to me that the World Bank's IFC, if you remember, I think it was about a month ago, we did a story where the IFC would be financing a South African company, a real estate company, to build student accommodation.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So the World Bank is busy in South Africa, busy financing these private ventures. Yep, interesting.
And I wonder what happened to our domestic capital in this context. I mean, we saw that government provided them the loan guarantee scheme of 200 billion. I think they only disbursed around 18 billion, but something less than 20 billion of that. But that to me was an indication that then our local capital markets aren't doing that, or not struggling at least to that extent. I might have called it wrong, but then I would be interested to know, what is the role of local capital in these investments? Because, the challenge typically with international finance and, funding from international DFIs is that some of their procurement requirements don't necessarily meet our transformational targets, and some of the transformational or the procurement requirements actually tie you to using service providers or either international or global sourcing requirements. And it's always a pity. You might remember a couple of years back during the European Commission, I think it was Tusk at the time, made damning remarks over the BEE requirements for government procurement, and said that they would be asking the South African government to reverse those requirements in the case of development finance from European DFIs. So this is typically what I'm referring to when I say, international development finance sometimes have procurement requirements that do not allow us to actually reach our transformational targets and also localize some of the jobs. It'll be interesting to see what is the impact, at least in terms of localization or SA Inc., as a result of this international finance that's playing quite a significant role in the SA market, which, being a middle income country, I wouldn't expect this much level of involvement. Would be interesting.
Precisely.
On that note, let's move on to our next story. The inquiry on free and fair local government elections. The inquiry on free and fair local government elections began its hearings to establish whether or not there should be local government elections in 2021 amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. The inquiry will hear oral submissions from the Independent Electoral Commission of South Africa, IEC, the Department of Health, NGOs, the Ministerial Advisory Committee on COVID-19, independent medical experts, electoral monitoring bodies, civil society organizations, and political parties who requested to make oral submissions. So far, the inquiry has reportedly received over 3,000 written.
Any indication as to when this process will be finished by?
The date they've set as the deadline for this inquiry is the 21st of July.
Okay. Now, would findings, if say Judge Museneke decides on a postponement, would those findings be subjected to a parliamentary process? The constitution is clear that there has to be a fixed 5-year term. So I take it there would be constitutional considerations. No, I was just saying. I was just emphasizing as to will these findings be subjected to a parliamentary process?
Yes. My understanding is that the approval for extension of the term of current office bearers will need to be approved by a parliament. I think that's a National Assembly decision to be made there. And then things will shift in terms of the electoral cycle as well as the dates. You must also, I also do think that it's also a role that will probably start with the Electoral Court, which has also recently allowed for the postponement of by-elections, which were supposed to take place on the 30th of June, which now have been postponed as a result of us entering level 4 lockdown. So I guess in the case of the national implications of the local government elections, there would be a requirement for a National Assembly approval or parliamentary approval in order to extend the terms of those who are currently office bearers. Once, I guess, the Electoral Court has approved the postponement of elections. I'm not 100% sure, though I must be clear that that is the process that would be followed. But I do understand that the role of the electoral court would be primary in this decision, and then I guess in terms of the extension of terms of those in office in local and metros and provincial, not provincial, district governments would then need to have their terms extended. So yeah.
I see. Yeah, on Wednesday, medical experts were before Judge Museneke. They raised fears about a possible fourth wave when they appeared. They say this would hit South Africa by about October. So they, in their view, they were saying that 80% of the vulnerable group, which is those who are above 60, must have been vaccinated if the elections go ahead, and mortality rates must have flattened. So it is going to be very interesting.
At this time, it's also quite interesting to note that the concern of the IEC and others, and here I'm also including some political parties, is the impact that holding these elections in October will have in terms of campaigning. So their concern is that given that we're in level 4 lockdown, we won't be able to hold those mass rallies for campaigning, etc. And let alone the concern about the actual voting being a mass spreader event for the whole country. So it's quite interesting to see where the interest and the focus lies, depending on which party you speak to.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to our next story. Liquidations and insolvencies for May 2021. The total number of liquidations decreased by 2.1% year on year to 195 in May 2021, compared to 195 the same time last year. Voluntary liquidations decreased by 7 cases, while compulsory liquidations increased by 3 cases. The total number of liquidations increased by 37.5% this year to date to 865 in the first 5 months of 2021. This compared to 629 over the same period last year. Finance, insurance, real estate, and business services lost 278. Unclassified businesses had 232 liquidations, whilst trade, storage, and communication sector had 187 liquidations. And these were the top 3 highest number of total liquidations this year to date.
Oh, is this a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic, do you think?
I definitely think this maybe the second wave or the second year impact, right? What we would probably consider the third wave. And I guess to some extent, we had our second wave at the end of last year. So, yes, here I think the biggest victims in terms of liquidations and insolvencies have been small and medium enterprises, given the distribution between closed corporations and big companies which have shut down. But the vast majority of the liquidations reflect this impact of the current wave that we're faced with, which small businesses have severely been affected. And if you look at also the sectors, trade and storage and unclassified businesses, regularly small businesses would run as unclassified or not fitting the big major sectors, and that's because of either they take on various activities in order to make their revenue, or mainly because they're quite small and informal. And for the unclassified businesses to be a huge chunk, close to over a third of the number of firms that have shut down in the first 5 months of this year, reflects the impact on small business.
I see. I'm interested in the real estate industry. being lumped in with the rest of this, the fire sector, the finance, insurance, and real estate sector. Considering the current climate of very low interest rates, they say these are the lowest in decades. There was reported to have been a mini recovery. The embers seem to have died down, but now I don't know. I don't think it's a. I think it's a question. Now I want to ask you, what do you think could be influencing this a slump, if I just, no, these liquidations, slump is not the right word, these liquidations in the real estate industry? Because they were saying that there is a mini boom, that's what they called it.
Very cryptic speak though, but I kind of gather your question roundabout. Look, so I think firstly we have to acknowledge the link between real estate and finance, right? In that a large chunk of finance would not take place, a large chunk of real estate trade or transactions would not take place without finance. And so the two are really symbiotic. And even if you think of it from an economic sense, either people are looking to save, in which case they would look for financing to buy real estate as a way to save future income, or people with real estate during a crisis looking to liquidate that real estate in order to have some cash and improve their cash flows. So the two have a symbiotic relationship. And your question was, what has caused the slump, or what has caused them to be the number of liquidations, given the fact that there's a mini recovery? Precisely because we're entering a sort of a stronger lockdown, I think. And if you look at the progression from the end of last year, when we faced our second wave, to where we are now, it's been a slow progression. It's almost as if the second wave, we were almost in denial that it's actually taking place, and we slowly increased the levels, but none of the restrictions were there compared to what there was the previous year, right, in terms of the hard level 5 lockdown at this time of the year. So now the point is, we've been trying to increase the restrictions without actually increasing the restrictions, but in terms of the level of alert, we're pretty much at level 4 now. But if you compare the level of restrictions now to where we were last year, it's nowhere the same. So I think, yes, we're seeing a slow tightening of restrictions, but I think what we're reflecting here is the actual impact of COVID on the sector, that despite even the legislation being lenient compared to where we are in terms of public health and the pandemic, the impact is taking place though in terms of the market, hence the liquidation. So people are still not able to recover from last year in terms of their tenancy rates, in terms of the sales that they were able to make from a real estate point of view. And despite the lowest interest rates in a long time currently, people just don't have the incomes in order to justify the financing. And, it's quite a quagmire, I would say. Because on the one hand, those with the real estate are struggling to keep their cash flows, and those who want to save are struggling to get the financing because their incomes are either uncertain or they've lost their incomes. So I think that's really what we're seeing in the market, and it's being reflected here in terms of the number of liquidations.
I see. What you are saying, Mitope investment managers agree with exactly what you are saying, because they're saying last year was a horrid year for the real estate industries. They're saying that South African listed property companies South African listed properties had about 3 billion rand in relief to shopping malls, office blocks which were closed, and landlords forfeited some of those rents. And that the listed property sector gave in a way of grants and deferrals 3 billion rands in relief to tenants. They also say 80% of this relief was in the form of non-recoverable discounts, together with increased provisions for bad debts. So exactly what you're saying, and the fact that valuations, there was a fear that valuations would collapse and that banks would call in loans. So many have had to sell their assets, and balance sheets across the sector are compromised. So last year, it seems, was very bad, even for the listed property sector. Yeah. And they basically say that the 3 billion rand in relief that they gave last year, no one really seems to wants to acknowledge their input. So it's quite interesting to me as to what will happen this time around, now that we have another wave, a third wave. Will those companies still have positive balance sheets? What will happen? How will it hit them? Because both the finance, the insurance, and the real estate were still in a recovery stage. If you remember, the banks had lost huge sums last year. So it will be very interesting to see what will happen going forward. Yeah.
No, we definitely have to keep an eye out on the recovery. And, my biggest concern and worry is that, so this second year of the pandemic and our third wave, we're facing without any kind of business rescue or business assistance. And I think it'll come further down the line. And at the same time, we've also closed the tap on things like the SDR grant, relief grant, as well as the myriad of other support, be it very negligible, that government was providing to the informal sector, which is going to be the hardest hit in this third wave. I do know that the current restrictions at level 4 are only being passed for 2 weeks as an initial period, but I don't think that there will be any market or significant improvement over the next 2 weeks in order to justify a return to where we were. So we'll have to keep an eye out on this recovery. Our last story from South Africa this week is the ConCourt judgment against Mr. J.G. Zuma. The Constitutional Court of South Africa handed down judgment declaring former President Jacob Gedleyihlekisa Zuma to be in contempt of court and sentenced him to a period of 2 years direct imprisonment. The main judgment further emphasized that Mr. Zuma was no ordinary litigant, but was the former President of the Republic of South Africa, who continued to wield significant political influence and in whom lies a great deal of power to incite others to similarly defy court orders. In determining the length of the sentence, the main judgment held that the court was enjoined to consider the circumstances and the nature of the breach and the extent to which the breach was ongoing. The focus had to be on what kind of sentence would demonstrate generally that orders made by a court must be obeyed, and that Mr. Zuma specifically has that his contumacy stood to be rebuked, and in the strongest of terms. The main judgment ordered an unsuspended sentence of imprisonment for a period of 15 months.
Some say this sentence is a bit heavy, and they make comparisons with apartheid president P.W. Botha, who at the dawn of democracy refused to attend the TRC hearings to give his own account of his role in apartheid crimes. At the time, when he refused to appear before the TRC Commission, it was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, similar to this one, because this one is also the State of Capture Commission. Both were commissions, not court proceedings. So at the time, he was given just a 10,000 rand fine. So some are saying, it's a bit heavy. They're making those comparisons. So is there any merit in your view to these sentiments?
Well, my first question is, when was the fine issued? If I remember correctly, the TRC started its sittings in around 96 or 97. Do you remember what year this fine was set? In any case, my point is that I don't think that these critiques have any merit, because people just seemingly want to have their cake and eat it. The fact is that the 10,000 rand fine was issued under an ANC-led government, and that if it's always been an issue, then why is it only being pursued now? So I don't know. Yeah, you can't have your cake and eat it, I guess.
Yeah. Now, did the Constitutional Court set out to make an example of this former President Zuma?
Yes,
he is viewed by some as having been provocative in his conduct, neglecting to even make representations to the apex court, as if to send a message that he questions even their legitimacy. I mean, my view is that there seems to have been a deliberate intention on the Constitutional Court's part to assert their authority, and to assert the hierarchy because the form of government we have in South Africa is constitutional democracy. Yeah, wherein Parliament and the executive are both accountable to, or let me say, are both subservient to the Constitutional Court. No standing president or former president is above the Constitutional Court. I don't know. I'm just saying, basically, it looks like they set out to make an example of the man.
Definitely. Look, if you read the judgment, it's very clear. And I think the legal fraternity is also flexing its muscle here. It's almost as if they're saying, we will not be disregarded by you, Mr. Zuma, and waving their hands as they say this. But, at the same time, we've almost come full circle. And now I'm seemingly understanding why former President Zuma, during his time, wanted South Africa to pull out of the ICC, stating at the time the bias that the ICC has towards African leaders in terms of the leaders that they prosecute. So at this point, I don't discount the fact that the Constitutional Court was stamping its authority, and that if he does continue to ignore being contempt of court even on this hearing, that they will probably take it further in terms of probably requesting the IEC to institute, because the ICC only prosecutes by request from the member countries, or in cases of impunity, by when they agree that the judicial system in a specific country is in no position or has actually deliberately chosen not to prosecute specific leaders. But typically their interventions are in cases of crimes against humanity and human rights violations. So it'll be interesting to see what's the next level in this fight, because it's almost as if we're watching a Western, and the guys are entering the center of the town and they're drawing guns on each other. Because this constitutional court had to also make a judgment the day after they made this judgment on former President Zuma against incumbent President Cyril Ramaphosa regarding the issue of whether or not he had misled Parliament in accounting for some of the funds that his campaign received in the run-up to the previous elections. And the judgment came out saying that they've actually reversed it. They've sent back that judgment to the High Court to make a determination as to whether or not the president was misleading Parliament, but that they say that a certain part of the application to the Constitutional Court that the president was not necessarily in violation of specific codes that he should have abided by. But it'll be interesting to see in the next 5 days that what's going to happen, because for me it's almost like we've seen a trailer of this with the former or SG Ace Magashule when he got his 5 days to turn to step down, and he refused, and then he's taken matters to court, and in the next 5 days President Zuma has to turn himself in, or there'll be a warrant for his arrest. It'll be interesting to see whether Pegicele will be able to serve and actually execute on that warrant, given the small little military that's forming outside of Nkandla. If you've been watching the news, it's almost like we're watching something from the 90s in the US in the wake of shootouts. It'll be interesting to see how this whole drama actually turns out.
Exactly.
But South African politics never fails to entertain.
Yep.
Okay, moving on to our Africa regional update for this week. Our first story for this week in the Africa regional update is 3 MSF workers killed in Tigray, Ethiopia. 3 employees of Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF agency, have been killed by unknown attackers in the restive Tigray region of Ethiopia. According to news reports, MSF lost contact with a vehicle that had been carrying workers from the Spanish branch of the agency on Thursday afternoon, and their bodies were discovered on Friday morning close to an empty vehicle. The victims were identified as Spanish national Maria Hernandez and Ethiopian staff members Johannes Halefom Reda and Tedros Gebramariam Michael. MSF is an independent international medical humanitarian organization made up of tens of thousands of health professionals, logistical and administrative staff operating worldwide. Conflict began in Tigray in November 2020 between the central government forces and the regional forces of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the TPLF, throwing the region into a humanitarian crisis with fighting sparking massive displacement and warnings from the UN of a looming famine. The UN humanitarian response to the highly volatile and complex security situation includes getting food assistance to around 5.2 million who are in need. So far, around 3.7 million people have been accessed, and more than 1,000 children were treated with severe acute malnutrition, and around 5,000 with moderate acute malnutrition in recent days, while more than 22,000 received medical services in the second week of June.
This is a terrible tragedy. MSF are similar to the Red Cross, isn't it? The humanitarians.
Except they focus more on health more than just sort of disaster relief.
I see. The situation for the internally displaced. Okay, Doctors Without Borders, I see. I mean, the situation for the internally displaced population is dire as it is, and much more help is needed to assist in the worsening climate. Has there been a resounding condemnation from both the AU or regional bodies, or is this civil war still continuing in the darkness of a media blackout?
Sure. Well, firstly, there was strong condemnation from the AU and UN, who both issued statements and, as usual, pleaded with the government to make the perpetrators pay. But soon thereafter, in fact, on Monday this week, there was a ceasefire announcement by the federal government of Ethiopia, which links to our next story. And it's not clear to me because the ceasefire just almost has shocked everyone, is unexpected, and we were not at a point at which the conflict was improving in such a way that we expected the ceasefire to be announced. Although, yes, the ceasefire has been received well, there's still some skepticism as to whether indeed the conflict has continued or actually abated. But this is also known as a humanitarian ceasefire, but we'll give more details obviously in the next story.
Okay.
In fact, let me go straight to the next story, which is the humanitarian ceasefire in Tigray, Ethiopia. The federal government of Ethiopia declared a humanitarian ceasefire in the Tigray region as the right step towards the resolution of the conflict. While a ceasefire will ease the passage of aid through Tigray and allow farmers to work more safely in the crucial planting season, the fight is far from over for those in the most desperate need. Violence in the region has caused acute shortage of food, fuel, and water, and left millions of people dependent on the international aid for their survival. Their need is overwhelming and ever-growing. The situation is at a crisis point with over 350,000 people on the verge of starvation in the Tigray. The African Union Commission Chairperson, His Excellency Musa Faki Mahamat, has called on the Ethiopian authorities to work towards a comprehensive and all-encompassing permanent ceasefire in order to pave the way for sustainable peace in Tigray.
There are news that the TPLF has retaken the town of Makele. Is that not the real reason behind this abrupt ceasefire?
I'm not sure. Can you perhaps go into some more details on your story? I haven't heard, this is news to me. I haven't heard much about this. So what actually took place? And how significant is the Makele, the town of Makele?
The town of Makele is the sort of like the regional capital, the provincial capital of the Tigray region. So I have heard reports that the situation is at crisis point with 350,000 in Tigray on the verge of starvation already. By when the TPLF retook Makele, the city was in the most desperate need of help, with around 8,000 said to have fled from Tigray to Afar, to Afar and to the Amhara region. Afar, which is in the south east, and Amhara to the southwest. We must also remember that at the beginning of this conflict, there were reports of ethnic fighting, especially between the people of Amhara and Tigray. So this is all. I don't know. This humanitarian ceasefire is it's the sincerity thereof is doubtful, because TPLF have taken the capital of Makele, meaning they've almost taken back they have almost won this battle. They've almost taken back Tigray. When you've taken the capital, that's the seat of power. So yeah.
So you're actually alluding to the fact that it might just have been a government compromise, because what I've seen is that increasingly the government's come under scrutiny and criticism for its indiscriminate attacks, which were affecting civilians, and increasingly has come under pressure as a result of this. So do you think that the reason they've reached a ceasefire is mainly because they realize that their response to the TPLF is not actually working, and that the TPLF is unlikely to step down.
Yeah. We must remember that the Eritrean forces have pulled back. And the fact that Addis Ababa,
This is a clear civil conflict.
Yeah. So Addis Ababa had the best word would be they'd neglected to do a thorough research to see how to sort of like see how strong the TPLF is. The TPLF had sort of like moved back strategically, given up lots of territory, but they weren't finished at all. They had moved into the mountains, and so as soon as the Eritreans moved away, it meant that there was less.
So the belligerents weren't there, they were at less risk, and hence could actually go back and take over ground which they'd given up already.
Exactly. And now the Addis Ababa has been taken by surprise by this, but the recent event.
So Addis is actually on a back foot at this point, and the TPLF has strengthened its position.
Exactly.
I just hope that this seems to me as if this humanitarian ceasefire is a temporary measure at best, and that it doesn't mean that the conflict has actually been resolved.
Not at all, yeah.
Moving on to our next story from the rest of Africa this week, the SADC 40th anniversary publication. The Southern African Development Community SADC chairperson and president of the Republic of Mozambique, His Excellency Philippe Jacinto Nyusi, launched the 40th SADC anniversary publication titled 40 Years of SADC, Enhancing Regional Cooperation and Integration. The publication highlights the history of SADC and key achievements that the region has made since 1980. The publication describes milestones as those momentous events or development processes that have contributed to the development of SADC. These include the historic Arusha and Lusaka conferences in 1979 and 1980, which led to the formation of SADC-C, which was the predecessor of current SADC, and the decision of the 12th SADC Summit to transform the organization from a coordination conference into a community. The decision of the summit in Maputo in August 1999 that led to the restructuring of SADC and the centralization of activities, the 2003 adoption of the Regional Indicative Strategic Development Plan, the RISDIP, and the launch of the SADC Free Trade Area in 2008, and the adoption of the SADC Industrialization Strategy and Roadmap in 2015. So that's another milestone that SADC has reached after 40 years of promoting regional integration in Southern Africa. Still a lot of work to do and much more to achieve, especially given the rising conflicts in the region, which are now seemingly undermining the progress that has been made in terms of regional integration and development in the region.
Yeah. What the milestones? I don't know whether there are any milestones to celebrate, really. I mean, the only milestone that I can think of is SACU, SACU, the South African Customs Union, Southern African Customs Union. Besides that, I don't know. I mean, even with the Southern African Customs Union, you find that South Africa gives back to these other countries 50% of revenue.
Common revenue from the common revenue pool, yeah.
Exactly. It has to give back because South Africa, they all dependent on South Africa. So,
It's a controversial view, but it's a little bit more complex than that, though. I must push back a little bit. As someone who worked on the actual SACU desk at National Treasury, look, although South Africa contributes 98% of the common revenue pool customs revenue, right? There are a lot of what they call re-exports. So goods which are actually going to countries, not South Africa, but within the customs union, Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, and Eswatini, but which are imported through South Africa. So as a result, South Africa is the one that contributes those monies into the common revenue pool, but those goods are actually finally consumed in neighboring countries. And so although we do provide up to 50% of 57% or more than half of those fees or those common revenue to the neighboring countries, we also benefit from the fact that those countries also in a way captive markets for South African exporters, and as a result we maintain a positive trade account balance with these countries, meaning South Africa exports more to these countries than what we import from those countries, which is a net positive for South Africa. And I think the tune of those monies in terms of the trade is around 96 billion rands per annum. But if you look at the common revenue pool, the last I checked, it was somewhere between 65 to about 75 billion rands that is distributed amongst all the countries. So I think the net benefit there, I think, positively lies within South Africa. But yeah, it's highly complicated. It's not very simple because, on the other hand, the countries don't contribute in terms of the excise duties, which are also part of the common revenue pool, just mainly because they don't have excise taxes which they charge, and they just don't have a excise system in the rest of SACU apart from South Africa. So South Africa, yes, does contribute significantly, but we do benefit through other means such as our trade surplus with the region. So yeah, it's a bit more complex.
Yeah, it is. There was a story this past week that about cars registered in Lesotho. People in SARS, the South African Revenue Services, got kicked out. Lost an appeal in the High Court. People buy cars in Lesotho. South Africans go out and buy cars in Lesotho, and they keep those Lesotho number plates. And cars are very cheap in Lesotho.
Well, that's mainly because of second-hand imports from Southeast Asia.
Exactly. So instead of paying exorbitant prices in South Africa, people go over and they keep. But now SARS wants their South African revenues services wants their own slice of the taxes, but now they can't. Because of these, anyway.
Well, it's also another complex issue because, firstly, second-hand car imports are banned in South Africa, and in many instances you need to get customs approval, and they'll charge you exorbitant taxes just to import the vehicle. So I think what most people do is the legal route, which is to come in with the car as though it were a temporary import. Because they can then every 6 months just go back and cross the border and come back again and use that vehicle as though it were a vehicle that is still ostensibly in Lesotho and Lesotho owned, but operating on South African roads. And so this is what is actually frustrating SARS and our customs at this moment. I've also seen them also the way they treat even cars from Zimbabwe. And, all the countries around South Africa don't have the same ban as South Africa, hence the cheap vehicles which they import from Southeast Asia, because the laws there, particularly in Japan, make it economically unviable for you to hold or use the same car for over a certain period. So they just export the cars as cheap secondhands and buy new cars. And the African car market actually, in large respects, is highly undermined as a result of those cheap secondhand imports, which cause significant headache and slow development on the continent in many ways. But that's a story for another day. But that SARS issue, I think, largely relates to that, and people not actually, because you can't import second-hand cars into South Africa, and if you do, you get charged significant import taxes, which most people effectively, those import taxes are supposed to render it economically unviable for you to buy a second-hand car, to such that you'd rather buy a new locally assembled or a completely brand new imported vehicle from outside South Africa.
So it seems South African wily customers will use this single tariff rule, whereby there are no customs duties between countries in the SACU region, to benefit themselves, to get these cars for cheap. Yeah. Very interesting.
Our last story from the Africa Regional Update this week is first meeting of the ECOWAS Committee on the Return of Cultural Properties. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, a regional monitoring committee on the Action Plan 2019 to 2023, the return of cultural properties to their countries of origin, held its first meeting on the 29th of June 2021 in Cotonou, Benin. In his opening remarks, Honorable Jean-Michel Abimbola, Minister of Culture and Tourism of the Republic of Benin, stressed that culture is the fruit of the creative genius of our ancestors and bears witness to a past that we must now approach in a constructive and uninhibited manner. The ECOWAS Action Plan was approved by the Authority of Heads of State and Government in December 2019 with the aim of contributing to the returning of ECOWAS member states' cultural goods to their countries of origin in order to reconstitute the regional cultural heritage. The Regional Monitoring Committee is mandated to validate the roadmap of the action plan, ensure compliance with the action plan roadmap, support the mobilization of resources to finance the action plan on the return of the cultural properties, support member states in the process of requests for the return of their cultural properties, support strategy for negotiations with the holder countries for the return of cultural goods to their countries of origin, and report to the heads of state on the implementation of the action plan.
A broad question. I think we've touched on it before. We've touched on how culture plays a part in Francophone Africa. Now, a broad question now: the importance of culture in the African philosophy. What is Ubuntunomics' stance, in your view, on the subject of culture? In your words.
Look, I strongly believe and actually live by the words of Honorable Jean-Michel Abimbola, the Minister of Culture and Tourism from Benin, that our culture is actually the fruit of the creative genius of our ancestors and bears witness to a past that we must now approach in a constructive and uninhibited manner. I strongly believe that Africans have a monopoly on cultural and creative industries. And yes, there are some across the world who have talent in the same sector, creative and cultural industries. But nothing compares to the creativity and genius of African people. And that's my 2 cents on the matter.
if I had to clap, I would give both you and the minister a round of applause. I think that's perfectly summarized. Yeah, sure.
And then our last story for this week in terms of the numbers game. All right, so the number this week is $66 billion. What do you think this number represents?
It's just a huge number. It's massive. I don't have the slightest clue. No, I can't even give you a guess this time around.
Okay, I'll give you a break this week and go ahead and announce what the number stands for. So $66 billion in climate finance in 2020. Climate finance committed by major multilateral development banks, MDBs, rose to a total of $66 billion in 2020. This from $61.6 billion in 2019, the year before. The MDBs include commitments by the African Development Bank of $2.1 billion, the European Investment Bank of $27.9 billion, and the World Bank Group, it's $22 billion. The commitments include a total private sector investment value of $19.4 billion, or around 29.3% of the total investment, and a total of 58% of this, or $38 billion, was committed to low and middle income countries, with sub-Saharan African countries accounting for $9.1 billion.
So is this just commitments, or was this money spent? Or is this expenditure, or is this what is it? What is it really?
So at this stage, these are just the commitments. So the disbursements, the process in terms of infrastructure financing starts with commitments, and then from there they have those approvals once the project has been appraised and approved, and then once that process is done, then they disperse the money. So these at this stage are commitments. It will be interesting to find out, of the committed $61.6 billion in 2019, how much was actually finally dispersed. And I guess it'll take some time for the 2020 figures to be published similarly.
Yeah, okay. Really nice.
On that note, that brings an end to our show this week.
Go.